Okay, this is an interesting chart. Oops, sorry, I tried to move it over. This is 4:30 when Terry Hobbs allegedly got home from work and asked where Stevie was. So you'll note that I've just popped in an asteroid in here, DNA. I want that to be in there because I want to see it as it goes around. So what we have here is, this is a Terry Hobbs perspective, okay? It's his time, it's his chart sort of thing. It's not his natal chart, obviously. So Libra is ruling, so that's Venus. Now, Venus is sitting in the decan of Mars in Aries on the 7th house cusp. Red flag number 1. Okay. Saturn is at 29 degrees in the 5th house of children. Red flag 2. Stepchildren and the death of a stepchild. The death of a stepchild is represented by the 6th house. And in there we have the part of fortune, which is opposing the ascendant and conjunct the descendant. It's also forming some pretty hard aspects to Mars. And Mars is conjunct the 11th house, and the 11th house represents stepchildren in general. The ruler of the 11th and the decan of the 11th house cusp is the Sun, and the Sun is sitting in the 8th house of death. So we've got a whole bunch of sort of areas, and the end of the matter, the 4th house, is in Capricorn, so that's Saturn, and that is the child and the body of a child, not a deceased body as such at this point in time, but it's a portent of things to come, is what it looks like to me. So the midheaven's Cancer and the moon. So, you know, Pam's at home doing the dinner. And Terry Hobbs is just sitting there in the old suspect area. But, I mean, he's also sitting in the area of being at home, being the partner in a relationship as well, you know. So that sort of makes sense. Now, Jupiter is also a ruling factor of stepchildren, and that is very, very close to that ascendant there. So that is interesting. Okay, so that's 4:30. Let's move it around and see what happens. Okay, so now we have 6:30, which is a time that was given by an independent witness that did see the boys riding and skating down the street. So we have a 0-degree Scorpio rising there. The neighbour is the 3rd house, and that is Capricorn. So Saturn is now in the 4th house, edging closer and closer to that IC, which is the end of the matter, as we know. The ruler of Scorpio is Mars, and that's up near the midheaven. So that shows me that I believe that they were seen by this person at 6:30. Now we have Mercury on top of the DC in Taurus. And as we know, Mercury is 2 people. So I think by 6:30 we have 2 people doing something together at this time. So that square is squaring Mars on the midheaven. So we've got 2 angry or hopped up people. And look at that, Mars is in Leo. And how often do we see this, Mars in Leo, when something bad's going on? So we've got the moon in the 1st house. It's nearly full, opposing the sun in the 7th. Pluto's in the 1st house, and it's aspecting the part of fortune and DNA. DNA is actually aspecting a couple of things as we move along, which is interesting. It's squaring this conjunction of Neptune and Uranus, which was very important back in that day, and still is, obviously. Okay, so 6:30. Terry Hobbs is a Taurus. I know this, and I'll show you afterwards. So this is starting to fit together. All right, now we have 7:30. 7:30 on the 5th of May is 11 minutes away from a full moon. The full moon occurred at 7:41 p.m, I believe. So at 7:30, Terry Hobbs has essentially put himself in Robin Hood Hills at about 7, but I'm going for 7:30 because it's right smack in the middle of, where the hell was he at this point? So let's look at it as though, where are the boys? Where's he? What's going on now? So we have a 12-degree Scorpio ascendant, excuse me, which represents the boys. It's in the decan of Neptune, which shows deception, drugs, alcohol, something that shouldn't be seen. The moon co-rules the boys, and it is very tightly conjunct the ascendant. So at 7:30, the full moon is near, so opposite is the sun, and that's sitting right on the top of the 7th house again. Now the sun in Taurus is even more representative of a Taurian sun person, but the sun represents a father, a father figure. So this, it's not as though the boys are at home and the father's at home. The opposition between the two is, it's almost as though they should be at home, but they're not, because they're in a place where they're being held by and hurt and killed by this son, by this older male. Now, the 6th house, as you'll recall, I said, is the death of stepchildren. We have DNA right here at 7:30, and it's making a really close inconjunct with Pluto in that 1st house. So that's interesting. We've got Mercury, which is the two people, and we've got the part of fortune again, sitting in that 6th house. The 11th house cusp, which is just stepchildren in general, is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is those two people. And Mercury, as I said before, is making a hard square to Mars. So, now it's actually getting closer with Mars at 3:54. Now there's some real tension and anger between the peoples that were there and them. So Mars is angry. And it's in the decan of the sun here. So near the sun and Mercury. This 6th house looks terrible at 7:30. Okay, let's have another look at things. Now Saturn obviously still at 29 degrees, edging closer to the IC. So I have a horrible feeling that the boys were actually still alive at this point, and the further we move forward, the further we're going to get more information. Now, it doesn't look like they're in a good situation, though. They're not... I don't believe that they're deceased at 7:30, but I don't believe that they're well and truly alive either. I think it's very possible that only 1 or 2 have been killed by this point, and I believe that there's been numerous visits back and forward in order to make sure that whatever happened happened. So at 7:30 it is not looking good at all, but what we're looking for is this Saturn to move closer to the IC. And as we can see, I'm not just sort of making this up, everything sits on an angle, which is where we look, and Saturn is the physical body. And at 29 degrees, especially in water, well, it's actually in Aquarius, but with a water sign, it's not a water sign, it's an air sign, you know what I mean, it's still watery, going into Pisces. It's like, okay, well, on the edge of water here, which is the slick back, it's the slink bank going into the water as well. Okay, I shall move on. All right, I've moved forward to 9/11, the time that Terry Hobbs called 911. Okay, so as normal, when we look at a chart like this, we want to see when he called the police, what were his intentions? What did he know? So we look at the third house cusp for the phone call. Now, we could use derived houses and find Pam's work and then find the phone from there. That's the way we can go about it, but this is much easier. So by this time, look at Saturn. It's gone past the IC into the third house. So there's some communication about his body, not about him, about his body. So I believe that he's been deceased before then. So we'll have to backtrack to find that time. But anyway, the third house cusp is ruled by Saturn because it's in Aquarius. So that's him talking to the police, but him also not knowing pretty much that he's talking about a deceased person. We look to the 8th house, it's in Cancer, in the decan of the moon on top of that. So the moon rules the 8th house, which is death, as we know. And the moon is over here now in the 12th house of hidden secrets and hidden enemies, hidden secret enemies. The 11th house ruler is now Libra, which was the very initial ruler at 4:30. So that's the stepchild there. So he's talking about Stevie being missing, but he knows what's going on. I'm sure he knows. It's right here in the third house. And the ascendant is Jupiter, that's sitting in the 10th house. Let me see, what's it doing? Making a trine to the path of fortune on the 7th house cusp. And look at that, the 7th house cusp, which is perpetrators. Although we don't change rulers like this, but it's gone into Gemini, which there's two people. So the phone call is right at this time, obviously. You know, Pam was there as well. But the part of fortune sitting on top is not good. It's not good for any of us, because I think it's almost as though this is him getting away with it for so long. Jupiter ruling the ascendant and making that trine to the part of fortune. So the 6th house, which is the death of children, the stepchildren, there's the sun in there. The 5th house relates to children as well, Mercury, and DNA is sitting there. And DNA is getting closer to that quincunx to Pluto, which is really intriguing. So, yeah, he's made this phone call, but he knows the result of the phone call. So that's what we look at when we look for 911 calls. Are they calling because they don't know what's going on? No. They're calling because he's calling because he knows what's going on. The 2nd house also represents just missing things, missing people as well. And Neptune is in there, and that's deception. So there's deception about the missing persons. So this is 10 past 8. Now I've moved the chart around until Saturn here, which is the physical body and death at 29 degrees, sits right on top of this IC, which is the end of the matter. Now, we've got Pluto angular. The moon, it's not angular, but it's close to the 1st house, but it's in the 12th house, hidden. The moon co-rules the boys, as we know. So by this time, I believe that they're deceased and trying to be hidden away. The death of stepchildren is highlighted with Sun and Mercury again. Now we've got the part of fortune sitting exactly on top of the DC again, but at 21 degrees this time, making an opposition to Pluto. So it's not good for the ultimate answer of who did this, but it's good for the killer because it's obviously enabled them to get away with it. Now, Mars on the ascendant again shows us that, Scorpio shows us that Mars rules the boy, and now we can see that Mars is making a sextile, which is 60 degrees an aspect to Jupiter, which you'll remember was important before, but it's now in the 11th house of stepchildren. And the 11th house, again, is ruled by Libra and in the decan of Venus, which it was at 4:30. So as it's sort of coming around full circle here, DNA has dropped out of the 6th house, which to me is them or him or whoever did it, because I have to say that, getting the hell out of there at that time, but leaving behind some DNA after having a bit of fun, because it's in the 5th house. You know, there's some nefarious activity that went on. I can pretty much assure that. Well, I can't assure anything, but that's what I think. Okay, so yeah, we've backtracked. 9/11 showed that he knew something had happened, and this chart pretty much shows me that by 10 past 8, there was probably, that was the end of it for the boys, for Stevie, Michael and Christopher. So I'm going to move a little bit forward now to 10:30 to see what was going on. Did they go home? Did they go back to Robin Hood Hill? Was David Jacoby with them? Where's Mercury? Where's Mars? Where's Saturn? I'm going to assume that Saturn's probably moved up into the 2nd house, or maybe even the 1st house, which would then show us that the killer has gone back again to ensure that something's covered up or something along those lines. So let's have a look. So this is 10:30, and this is actually quite interesting because the part of fortune again is sitting on top of the DC. Every chart we look at, and that doesn't happen all the time. It's changing degrees and everything, but it still sits atop this aspect. It's like a film of protection that is just over the top of this person. But as we can see now, as I said before, we're looking for, is 2 people involved? Is there 2 people doing something at this point in time? The DC is the suspect, and it is in Gemini. The ruler of Gemini is Mercury, and Mercury is 2 people. So exactly what I thought is what's showing. Now, not only that, Mercury DNA has now moved into the 4th house, which is the end of the matter. So the end result was that there was DNA left at the scene, and that 2 people left the scene. The very end of the matter is ruled by Aries, which is Mars, and that's the boys. And that's now in the 8th house of death. So that is literally the end of the matter for the boys by 10:30. So to me, it's as though by 8:10, something was well and truly finished with. But then at 10:30, he had to go back and make sure that this was well and truly finished with. And I think it might have been at that time that the DNA was left. I think through movement. It was in a shoelace. And I believe through movement that this has happened. And being so close to Mercury, yeah, it's definitely remnant of something along those lines. Okay, Jupiter rules the situation at this time. It's at the midheaven, so whatever's happening is pretty important at this point in time. 6 degrees Leo isn't the best position to be in for the MC either. But now that's formed an exact opposition to Venus in Aries. So now I haven't gone into the reasons why these people could have killed the boys, but I believe that Venus may represent some of this. And Venus doesn't just always represent females, you know. We even have Venus making a trine to Mars, the boys. So along with the moon in Scorpio near Pluto, there's a sexual element here, which is just awful. But there is. So going back to the very first chart, which is the most reliable, 6:30 from the neighbours, from the neighbours that saw them. The fact that we have 0 degrees on the ascendant and the descendant here is, well, it shows me that it is the beginning of what was the end for the boys, because they were last seen by this lady, and I think she probably was, aside from the people that killed them, the last person that saw them. We can see that the boys are still ruled by Mars, which is at the midheaven there. Exactly 353 and 350, so close. The co-ruler of them is in the 1st house. It's opposing the sun in the 7th house of suspects. Mercury, which is 2 people, is very close to that suspect line. So there's really an indication that there's 2 or more. And when I do other charts like this, I count all planets in the 7th to see what's going on. So we've got the sun here too, which is a father figure, but also an older male. And so there could be an older male and 2 younger males. There could have been 3 people there. Now the sun is in the decan of Gemini. So, you know, it really adds to that credence that there's more than one person. At this point in time, the closest aspect that Mercury is making to anything is to Jupiter in the 12th house. So there's hidden secrets, hidden things going on at this time. Everything is to do with the death of his stepchild. And yeah, in all honesty, this chart just shows us a lot. In Aquarius, I mean, the water signs are obviously Pisces, Cancer and Scorpio, but when we see Aquarius, many people relate that to water. And it's in the decan of Uranus, which is the modern ruler of Aquarius. So it was something that was I don't think it was planned, but it was unexpected, but through anger. And Mars opposing the IC there so closely shows that as well. So this anger really triggered this off, and then they ended up in water, which is shown here. So the chart at 6:30 shows us, it really shows us a lot. The DNA is right next to the part of fortune in this chart. So close, it's just over 1 degree. So there's like a protection bubble over that DNA. I mean, the DNA was found in one of the boys' shoelaces. The other DNA was found on the tree stump, and then there was another hair found, and it meant nothing. They got away with it still. So DNA meant nothing at that point in time even, which is crazy to me. But as I said before, Saturn here, which is the body of a person that's going to die, is moving towards the IC, which is the end of the matter, or the womb and the tomb, as I say. It's a horrible way to say it, but it's the easiest way to understand it. So, yes, it actually really does look astrologically as though 2 people are involved. Hence the reason I found it so necessary to get involved, to the point where I wanted to talk to these people, speak to HOBBS and David Jacoby and find out what was going on. And I'm just going to show you a couple of things. Okay, just to finish it off, I'm going to chuck a couple of little things in there to show that this is all real and I have been involved in it and whatnot. Not that that matters, but there's also something here. David Jacoby and Terry Hobbs are were very vocal throughout the years, and would argue and laugh at Pam and her family and Jolene, and it was just disgraceful. I think it's interesting, this one here. Pam categorically states David Jacoby is a liar. He did not attend Stevie's funeral. He said he did, but he didn't. He was a coke dealer. He was with Hobbs the night his son was killed. Why did he not come tell me at work? he robbed me of a chance to look for my son as well. So he knew that Stevie was missing, but he didn't do anything. And he lied, you know. I don't know where David Jacoby stands in this. He's very good at being deceptive, but I do believe that he broke down a little in the movie West Memphis 3 to John Douglas, and I think that's worth looking into. Another thing that happened during the case was Anonymous got on board, and that was really very interesting, insightful, and, you know, they offered something to it. It helped a little. It didn't help as much as we were hoping, but hey, you know, it was great to have them on board. And then something that I did myself was I helped re-elect Judge Dan Stidham, who was the judge for Jesse Miss Kelly, to get back into Greene County. I liked Dan Stidham. I got on really well with him, and something happened there, and that went quite sour, because Dan Stidham, I believe, had some evidence that until his book was released. And you'll note his book has not been released. Now, this very quickly came down. I do not support, and that's not any secret either, because I told him. So, and as I said, I run a huge group on Facebook. So a lot of these things have come from that page, including the beginning of the preview where I showed you where Terry Hobbs discussed green beans at length. And as you'll note, it was questioned to him in his deposition about dinner time, and etc. So making some type of joke about green beans and Thanksgiving dinner was not only inappropriate, it was disgraceful. And another thing is, I'm not going to recant anything that I say, even if I'm wrong, because Terry Hobbs is a murderer. And I can categorically say that because he shot Jackie Sr., which is Pam Hicks' father. He shot him in the stomach. He survived, but he had so many complications that he died. So in my eyes, I don't know how the law sees it or how the rest of America sees it or whatever, but in my eyes, Terry Hobbs is a murderer. He should be behind bars for killing Jackie Sr. And that is why I've put this out here. He's put himself out there for everyone to see. He's put himself out there for all of this to come back to him. And it's in a public forum. So, you know, someone needs to question this murderer to the point where he gives it up. Because obviously the deposition was leading that way. If he was allowed to just push him a little bit further, he would have got some more answers. So why is Terry Hobbs and David Jacoby, at the very least, let alone those other two that I won't even go into, why are they not being dragged in and talked about and whatever? Because they don't want the answers, because they don't want to pay the West Memphis 3 $60 million for falsely imprisoning them. And that's the sad truth of it. Okay, that might be part one, because I've actually got a lot more to talk about, but I'm pretty sure that's nearly an hour and a half. I hope I've kept your attention. I hope something has perked up your interest. If you know anything, come on, dob them in. Thank you.